Alright, so this video will focus on 2.4. And the first thing we're going to do is start off with just doing some basic multiplication of positive and negative integers. Just looking at these, you know that this answer will be negative. I'll just put a little mark here so I remember. So negative, well there it is. This one here will be a negative as well because it's a negative times a positive. This one here should be a positive. This one down here should be a positive. This one here should be a negative. And this one here should be a negative. So let's take a look. So I have a negative 110. A positive 168, this should be a positive 8, a negative 14, and finally a negative 27. So really we all know how to multiply and divide. The big thing is knowing what value, if it's going to be a positive or a negative. The essential question is, why is the product of two negative rational numbers positive? And this is it right here. So we're going to justify each step. If I take a negative times a negative, so the opposite of a negative is a positive. So I'll put that right here. These two together equals the one positive. And then I have plus a negative. And then this says it equals this positive plus this negative is what it's showing. And we keep on going down. So this negative and a positive, that will cancel each other out. So that's 0. So this is negative 2 plus 1. Oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Because this is in brackets, so it's negative 1 and positive 1. So this equals 0. I'm going to multiply this value times this negative 1. And this is that property of 0. That's what this really is. So it'll equal 0 regardless. This one here basically says if I take this number and put it on a number line, then I multiply it by negative 1. So if I'm here and I put it down, so here is 2, and I put a 0. And the question is, if you take 2 times negative 1, I have negative 2. If I take this one here, I have 8, 0. And now 8 times negative 1 is negative 8. This one here is negative 1. And negative 1 times a negative 1 is 1. So in all cases, it's almost like the absolute value format, isn't it? It's the complete opposite. So if it was a negative 2, it becomes a positive 2. Negative 8, positive 8, and so on. So how does it change the location? Well, it appears to change the location in reference to 0. So if it was at negative 2 here, it now goes 2 units away from 0 the other way. If it was negative 8 units away from 0, when I multiply by negative 1, it becomes a positive 8, and so on. And now it says, what do you think is going to happen when I do this? Well, if it's at 1/2 away from 0, if I multiply by negative 1, it is now negative 1/2 away from 0. It's still the same distance from 0, just on the other side of the number line. And this is the same thing that we did before, where you take a negative times a negative is a positive. Really, we know that any letter by itself is actually negative 1. So there's always a 1 in front of the variable. So if I just have a, we know that a really equals 1a. But we know we don't have to write 1a all the time. So that's what this is showing. So negative a is really negative 1 times a. And negative b is really negative 1 times b. And kind of going through all these steps here. A negative times a negative is a positive. So I have my positive 1. And then that times this right here will continue to keep my answer positive. All right, so then we're going to look at multiplying fractions. And the big thing here is it's kind of hard to just multiply. I would first turn this into an improper fraction. So this here would be negative 9/4. So if I go over here and I take negative 9/4 times 4/5, I just multiply straight across. That equals negative 36 over 20, or 1 16/20. And that can be reduced down to negative 1 4/5. So let's see what we get here. Negative 1 4/5. This one here is negative 3 to the 3rd power. So 3 times 3 times 3 is negative 27 over 5 times 5 times 5, which is 125. This here, I know my answer will be a positive. and I get positive 366. When I divide, dividing is really, if this is negative 3 over 1, it's really taking this number and multiplying by 1 over negative 3 is what we're doing here. And the reason why is you're trying to make this equal to 0. And so if I go through here and I multiply this by 1, I'll have to multiply this by, here, let me write this out. All right, so with number 4, you can do this 2 different ways. You may have learned that you would do the reciprocal, meaning I would take this, and I have 14, so I have negative 18 sevenths. And then I'm going to multiply that by negative 1 over 3, which is the reciprocal. And if I do that, I get 18 over 21. But another way I could do this is I could take 18 and just divide it by 1. Because if I look here, I could take a 3 out of both of these, right? And I get 6 over 7. Well, I could go through here and just take negative 18 divided by negative 3 and also get 6 over 7. You can just divide straight across. There's no issue with doing that. So negative 18 divided by 3, or negative 3, is positive 6, and then I'm left with a 7. So there's 2 ways to do this, at least. Negative 9.6 divided by 8, same kind of thing here. I could divide straight across if I'd like to, or multiply by 1/8. And when I do that, I get negative 1.2. And then finally, this one here is 6.45 hundredths divided by negative 30. I could either divide by 30, or I could multiply by negative 1 over 30. In either case, I get negative 215 thousandths. So here's the next key idea about multiplying and dividing rational numbers. If I'm multiplying, I just multiply straight across. That's all it's showing here. And if I divide, I first of all take my second number here and I do the reciprocal, which happens to be 4/9. And I just multiply straight across, just like I did up here. Another way to do this, again, as I said before, you could take negative 1 divided by 4 and you get negative 4, and then 2 divided by 9. Unfortunately, these numbers don't work out very well, but if they would, you could do that. That's why people do this invert and multiply method. The other way to think about this is I can write this down as negative 1/2 over 4/9. Looks confusing, but check this out. I want to make this equal to 1 at the bottom. We're not used to seeing this complex fraction. So I multiply this side here by 9 over 4. We call it the multiplicative inverse. If I multiply the bottom by that, I have to multiply the top by that as well. Now the bottom, when I do this, will equal over 1, right? So I'll have this number over 1. So that's why I get this 9/4 is what I'm really doing. So negative 1 times 9 is negative 9 over 2 times 4, which is 8. So that's another way to think of this as well. This one here, we have to think about what's approximately going to be. So negative 5 divided by 2 is about 2.5, negative 2.5. So my answer should be somewhere around there as an estimate. So we're going to go through here and start solving it. And I'm going to do improper fractions first of all. So I have negative 26 over 5. Oops. And then divided by, and that will be 7/3. Again, I want to get this so it's just 1 at the bottom. So I'll do times 3 over 7 on both sides. And that's how I get these numbers right here that I get. So it should be negative 2 and 8/35. For this one here, I know my answer is going to be negative, and I just multiply straight across. And I get negative 9 as my answer. For this one here, I have to first do what's in the brackets. So negative 4 times 7 is negative 28 over 5. And then I'm going to divide that by 7. So, or multiply by 1/7. Now, another way to think of this is these two things will cancel each other out. This is really 7 over 1, and this is negative 1 over 7. So these numbers will cancel each other out, and I'll be left with 4/5. So that's another way to think about that. To divide this one, again, I don't like to set it up across. I do -6/5 and then over -1/2. And then I want to make this equal to 1 in the bottom. So I'll say -2/1 times -2/1. Now on the bottom I have my 1. And right here I have 12/5. And that is my answer. And then 5 goes in 12 2 times with 3 left over. So that's how I get my 2 2/5. And then here are a couple other ones that you could take a look at. For this example, it asks you to find the mean. So I look at this average. I add 3 numbers together, -180 and 39 cents, 127 and 28 cents, and then -280 and 52 cents. I add them all together with a grand total of -$333.63. And I divide it by the amount of numbers that I'm adding, which is 3. So that means in all, on average, I lose $111.21. So that's my mean change in value of stocks. Now this next one's going to ask, what if I added this value to it? So if I added $568.23 to these numbers here, my answer will now be positive if I add 500, but then I'll divide it by 4, right? So it's $58.65. And then finally, this will be the exit ticket that I will give you as you go. Just looking here, the answer is going to be a negative, right around 6 or possibly 7-ish. And then this one here, I'm going to first multiply these two together. So half of this, which is about 2.1. So positive 2.1 divided by this right here. So I have -8 and 59, or 8 5/9, and this one is equal to 70.